Today I want to discuss something that I have discussed several times before. It is something that has mystified many over the years because of the world we know of and the world that may be hidden beneath our feet. The hollow earth, a topic many of you know well. But instead of talking about what is in the hollow earth, I want to talk about something that we can take a closer look at that is on the surface, and that is the hollow earth entrance. And if there is an entrance at the North Pole, is the South Pole the exit? When you have a credible scientist create a map of the world that requires a great degree of accuracy, why would the same scientist add in his own version of what supposedly exists at the North Pole? Everything else seems to be pretty accurate, but when you get to the map of the North Pole, it's somehow made up. So let's take a closer look at what may be the entrance into the inner earth, beneath the falls of Black Mountain. So we have old maps and we have new maps. And the idea is that the new maps are supposed to be more accurate. Now, there was a man by the name of Gerard Mercator, who was a Flemish cartographer. And what he is known for is a method of map making called the Mercator projection. I can hear the comment section now. Oh no. Anyway, the Mercator projection was created for sailors, really. It was a way to take the curved lines of the earth and project them onto a flat map, because the earth's not flat. Sailors were getting lost. Anyways, sailors used it so that they could plot straight line courses with accuracy. Because if you take a flat map and try to fold it up into a globe, it doesn't work. Everything is off. And vice versa, if you take a globe and just unwrap it, it doesn't work. So, in 1569, Mercator decides to take this method and use it to create a map of the world, one that would stretch from east to west, and he promised that the map would be free of errors. In other words, the map would be as accurate as the old shipmasters' maps they were currently using. The map had to be useful for navigation. So he did omit accuracy in other areas for that purpose. Basically, the top and bottom portions of the map had to be stretched out, so you wouldn't be able to look at this map if you wanted to use it for size accuracy. So it really makes it just a map for sailors. The top portion of the map, the Arctic region, is so stretched out that it looks infinite, right? So he decided that he would include a top-down view of the Arctic in a mini-map at the bottom left corner, which brings me to this map, which many have said is the first true map of the Arctic. Over some years, Mercator and his crew would update and enlarge the map. There was a 14th century travelogue written by an English minor friar of Oxford. According to the story, this man traveled to Norway and then pushed forward up into the North Pole. And the information in that travelogue gave Mercator the idea to place a massive black rock in the center of the map, called Black Very High Cliff. And people accepted that this mountain was there and was magnetic, which is why compasses pointed north. Mercator, however, rejected that theory. So what he did was he included another rock much higher up on the map, right before you get to the Strait of Anian, which he labeled Magnetic Pole to represent magnetic north. Mercator separates the Arctic with 4 massive chunks of land with water channels that run into the center, or rivers, into a massive whirlpool. The whirlpool idea came from two 16th century explorers who went up into northern Canada describing how the icebergs were being pulled towards the pole in a strong current. Now, if that wasn't strange enough, each of the four continents is quite special. One is the land of the little people, the pygmies, who are around 4 feet tall. After Mercator died, more up-to-date maps were created. They omitted Mercator's rendering of the Arctic and replaced the 4 islands with one big chunk of land surrounded by smaller islands. And this was based on the routes of ships. Now here's what's interesting. If you look at a topographic map of the same region, you see that the 4 continents or islands are gone. Or are they? If you look closer, you can see that the islands are still there, only submerged. You can see that the ridges and basins are similar to the formations on Mercator's map, especially Pygmy Island. Today, the mainstream will tell you that the Arctic is just water with some ice on it, but never really talk about what is underneath the water. Which brings me to the next mystery, which is the mountain and the entrance. Now, before I get into that, I very well understand that there are those of you who are curious about people who have been to the North Pole, and South Pole for that matter. Yes, you can go to the North Pole and you can go to Antarctica. The North Pole gets around 1,000 visitors a year, and Antarctica gets around 20,000 visitors. It's actually more accessible than the North Pole. You'd have to go during the Northern Hemisphere summer. It's around 20 grand for a plane, another 10 for ground transportation. Because it's not like Antarctica. There's limited cruises or stations, but that's really just into the Arctic region, because Antarctica is supposed to be land with ice over it, and the North Pole is supposed to be water with ice over it. So really, you are going out into the middle of nowhere. There is no pole at the North Pole. There is no pole sticking out of the ground. People put those there. They don't stay there. You're basically walking on ice all day. Everything looks exactly the same. And then your guide says, well, according to this, we're here, I think. And you say, well, that's good enough for me. You stick a pole in the ground, take a cool picture, and go home. That is what people do, while the real North Pole is somewhere out there in the water among the glaciers of ice. Trust me, if there are certain places that they do not want you to go, it is very easy to keep you out, if nature doesn't kill you first. You can't go to certain places here. So, after the creation of the Mercator maps, people believed that the center mountain was actually a mountain of lodestone, which is the mineral magnetite, very rare. At the same time, people believed that the water was flowing and pooling into some type of cavity into the bowels of the earth. So with this description, you can imagine, essentially you have a large hole at the center of the North Pole with water draining into it, where there is a large chunk of land or mountain protruding out of the center of the hole, which means that the water is really draining into a large circular crevasse or sinkhole. It would be like a mountain surrounded by a perimeter of waterfalls. If you were somehow able to get from the water across the gap onto the mountain, you would be able to then go down the mountain underneath the waterfalls into the hollow earth. In theory. How many times have you seen water falling over caves? And I'm not talking about a perfect circular hole. So, is this idea too far-fetched? By the way, I did create this animation to show you how I am picturing this in my head. So, let's say that this is the case. Once you get past this into the hollow earth, it gets tricky because you're talking about changes in physics, wildlife, vegetation, atmosphere, heat, cold, light. If this was or is the case, how? If a scientist traveled to the North Pole in warmer climate with very little ice and saw this, how would you explain its natural formation? So I thought about this and I thought that, well, if there is a mountain rich in lodestone, then you would have a pretty significant magnetic field surrounding that mountain, which also means you would have a lot of lightning. I would imagine some volcanism as well. Also, the magnetosphere is taking all that cosmic radiation from the sun and the cosmos and pouring it, most of it, into that area all day. And does that type of radiation affect the ground? Yes. If radiation was pouring into the surface of the North Pole, irradiating the ground, then the crystal structure of the minerals in the ground would be altered. And if there is any water flowing below the surface of that area, it would also be affected. If you have water above the surface and below the surface, and you keep having this irradiation and temperature changes in that area, then it becomes very likely that a sinkhole could form, creating the hole, because a sinkhole usually occurs when you have water underneath the earth that is filling up the open areas underneath the ground, and then the water drains out. Then it fills up again. When you have that back and forth, it can cause the ground to collapse. Taking the mountain into account, of course. Which wouldn't surprise me. We have some very strange places on the planet, and many people still have not come to any conclusions on how they exist. But they do. I realize this is hypothetical based on theories that stem from bits and pieces of information, but it does get you thinking. Could it be that this place once existed during the time period it was described, and now in our time period it's just well hidden, submerged, and at times frozen over? Now look, you're not going to get any real photos of this. Hey, forget about it, right? The ones you do see are either faked or doctored to cover up something that may or may not be there. See, this is where we have to be careful, because one of the tactics that is used quite often against us is allowing people to run with the story. In other words, there are people who some believe know what's truly up there, right? And you get to believe whatever you want to believe. And whoever has the best story, that's what people run with. And these entities will and have put out stories, images, and videos that support the story we've created. Do you see? They actually believe there's a hole at the North Pole. Well, if they believe that, they'll give them a hole. This is how they think, and this is what they do to help them cover things up. Truth is stranger than fiction, and I am pretty sure that whatever you actually found up there would be extreme to the imagination. The best we can come up with so far is a land of dinosaurs and aliens. This subject is always interesting, and we will come back to it. Until then, be sure to visit woodwardentertainment.com and the Woodward Entertainment Store. Look into some of the things I mentioned, and as always, stay awake, stay aware, stay safe, and I'll talk to you all soon.